Kevin, I want to thank you and Asia Society for bringing us together for this very important symposium. I'm your moderator. I'm Cindy Hsu. I'm an anchor for nearly 30 years at WCBS-TV in New York City, and our parent company is Paramount Global. Our wonderful panelists are members of Asia Society's Global Trustees. We have Steph Hui, co-head of Merchant Banking Division, Goldman Sachs, Hong Kong. FRITZ DEMOPOULOS, chairman of Queens Road Capital, and Duncan Clark, OBE chairman of BDA China Limited. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thanks, Cindy.
Having us.
A real pleasure.
Now, I just wanted to let everyone know where we're located. Like I said, I'm in New York. Steph, you're in Hong Kong?
Yes, I am here. It's evening.
And Fritz as well?
Yeah, Steph and I are neighbors. I'm in Hong Kong too.
Oh, okay. And then Duncan, you're in Beijing?
That's correct. Same time zone as the other guys.
Okay. Well, you know, we're all experiencing the latest wave of anti-Asian sentiment differently. And just, I'll pop in and just say personally, you know, I cover the news, so it's my job to know all the details of every attack. And they're horrible. So I can't get away from it. And for me, a lot has changed. I live in the city. I walk the streets much differently now. I'm always aware of who's coming towards me, who's behind me. And I actually, whenever I see somebody coming towards me that might be threatening, I just kind of go like this and act like I'm just, you know, brushing my hair or something, and it's actually to keep an elbow up to be able to push someone away if they get too close. So that's kind of how it's been for me. I'm wondering what it's been like for you. How has the current environment surrounding anti-Asian sentiment affected you personally and professionally? Steph, I want to start with you.
Yeah, Cindy, it resonates a lot. The anxiety, the anxiousness, it really, I feel it. I was in New York actually 2 months ago, and I was walking up the city from downtown to Midtown, and it was early in the morning. And frankly, I feel a lot more nervousness than I've ever had. I used to live in New York City during my younger years. And also as a parent, I have kids who are actually at boarding school in Europe. And I also feel for them because there's a lot of nervousness about what's happening. There were incidents of Asian kids getting attacked in London during that period. So I would wake up worried about them and have to have difficult conversations explaining to them what is racial discrimination, why is it happening. And it was difficult because these are teenagers and they feel that the world is their oyster and they could do anything and everything, but to be discriminated against or potentially discriminated against is actually very challenging.
Fritz and Duncan, what have your experiences been as allies, and what are you hearing from friends and colleagues?
Well, maybe I'll start, Duncan, if you don't mind. First of all, I'm a parent as well. My wife is from Hong Kong, so I have two daughters who are half Chinese, half American, and similar to Steph, I have a lot of concern. We intend one day to spend more time in the United States, and to hear those stories, it's very disheartening. And obviously the crimes against a number of Asian Americans, we just don't want to hear it. What happened to Michelle Go, and I think in particular resonates with me because we both went to the same college. She worked for a company, Deloitte, which I have a lot of relationships with. And, just to hear that, it's like, wow, I mean, that could have been any one of a dozen of my friends. And so I can really relate to that, and I really feel for her family and her friends, and it's just very difficult.
Duncan, how about you?
Well, I'll start with because I've been mostly in China during this period, although I have been in the US early on in the pandemic. But in China, I mean, just one thing to speak to is the cost of racism on the US's and other Western countries' profile abroad, right? And this is, worsening the geopolitical tensions, which are already there, of course. But this is, of course, fed into, state media here in China. But more importantly than television, it's on WeChat. It's circulated around, and to the point that my other half is Chinese, my husband, and we worry about where we go next. It's always better when you get there and you walk around, but the fact that you're constantly bombarded in these groups, particularly early on in the pandemic, when there was that early reaction. We were in the States a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic, and you never quite knew why people were a bit standoffish, and it's that doubt, that it just corrodes everything, right? I mean, even if it's the horrible situations you've experienced of violence, it should be documented and should be prosecuted. But there's a lot of these sort of minor things you're never quite sure what's going on there, and so that stuff feeds back, and that affects the world in terms of making us more divided. It interrupts education, exchange, and it's not easy as said on geopolitics, but this is definitely not helping.
I think a question for a lot of companies is how they can help their AAPI employees and, create more allies. And I'll just tell you, my company, Paramount, created an AAPI allyship toolkit. It's 30 pages of really important information for anyone. It has covering history, everything from, Chinese Exclusion Act to what we're facing now, and also has concrete steps on how to, be more inclusive with your AAPI colleagues, which is a part that I really like, that gives kind of steps. And I'm wondering, from the three of you, is there anything that really stood out in the toolkit to you? Because I know you've all had a chance to look at it.
So maybe I'll start first. At Goldman, we have placed a lot of emphasis on diversity. And last year, our Asian American community came together and we had panel discussions to have shared experience. And it's actually very empowering and powerful to talk about it. A lot of people experience racial discrimination for the first time in their lives, and they could be second or third generation Asians. And so that sharing is important. The other thing we did is actually we came together and we put some videos together, explaining what is microaggression, what is the importance of diversity, what is allyship, and why is it important for all of us to be vigilant and also be aware of the importance of spreading the word on being inclusive. So that participation, as well as programs that we have where individuals and the firm gave donations to charity that actually advocate for that, was very meaningful and very timely. We also had our CEO, he left messages to the firm on a firm-wide basis and being very advocating for diversity. And that is important for all of us to hear at that time.
Yes, Cindy, I think that toolkit produced by Paramount, I think that's a good start. I think there are a lot of people of goodwill that may not understand, frankly, the big picture. They don't understand the heterogeneous nature of the Asian region and the immigrant experience and some of the common threads that run through the AAPI community. And I feel that toolkit is just a way to open some eyes and to really, really help not just, frankly, I guess you could say the non-AAPI members of the community to really have an appreciation for, some of the challenges that, our comrades and friends are going through.
Duncan?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the diversity, which really stands out from the document that you've kindly shared, and how ridiculous it is to lump half of humanity together and in one slur. It's like, is that all you can do? I mean, it really is just the ignorance is just the biggest thing that stands out from how ridiculous this is. And this is an old virus, as you mentioned. I mean, the Exclusion Act goes back over a century, and it stayed on the books for a long, long time, right? So this virus is much older than the current virus, let's say. And I think we all need to inoculate ourselves, even as you said, against unconscious biases, the way that we speak, the way that we act, even unknowingly. And this happens at every on every aspect of diversity as well, and at different age groups in different ways, based on culture that we've all been through. And it's even flip it around. I mean, in China, in Shanghai, where I'm not now, but there's been this rough lockdown, and there've been some neighborhood groups commenting on foreigners and in ugly ways, but it's actually been a learning experience, even in these very difficult situations. Sometimes people tend to point to the other and say that we're different or make jokes. But those jokes can be hurtful. In the case of one particular instance in Shanghai, was an African-American living in a building who made light of it. And actually, frankly, it was very, very impressive how he dealt with it. He said, look, diversity is not something that people in China are actually very much exposed to, but it's important, and all of us, if we're going to live in a global community, we need to make that effort.
Agreed. Steph, you were talking about some things that your company is doing to fight this anti-Asian sentiment. I think it really does make a big difference when it comes from the top, and you get support from the top. I remember the head of Viacom CBS sent out the emails when they were also donating to different causes, like Stop AAPI Hate, and then reminding us that the company will match donations. So if we wanted to donate as well, the company will match those. And then our, AAPI Employee Resource Group helped a lot. The 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta shootings, the group sent out this long email that talked about recent crimes against Asian Americans. And, we're very specific. So just to know that people are keeping track and it's not just one big blur happening all the time, that each victim is a person. And they put all the different services that we have at our company, mental health links, different links, even to books that can help educate people about what's going on and about the history. And I'm wondering if there's anything your companies or your colleagues are doing that has been helping.
For me, it was particularly powerful when we had these sessions where we all got together to talk about allyship. I turned around and I looked into the crowd, and the diverse nature of who is there, right? You basically have people from, all different levels, and you also have people from different races that came together to support each other. So for me, seeing that solidarity was particularly powerful. And I would never forget that scenery. And as you said, the messaging coming straight from the top, it was very energizing for us to see that.
Fritz or Duncan, are you seeing anything from your colleagues or your companies that's helping?
Yeah, Cindy, I think how what we've observed and what I think is really important is on one hand, like Stephanie said, I think at the highest level of an organization, and we call that governance, and making sure that our boards are adequately diversified. And that means if our businesses are going to be doing business within the Asian region or even domestically in the United States, and that's going to account for a big part of our revenues, then obviously we need adequate representation. And so governance is an important part of it. Also, our performance management systems, we need to make sure that we compensate, we evaluate our employees on a very fair basis, and we're not biased by obviously, some cultures are slightly more reserved, and that does not suggest in any way that they're, reticent or maybe not aggressive. It's just because of the culture, there's possibly more differential. And we see that in the Far East and, frequently. And we have to say, hey, you know what, our performance management systems need to take that into account and shouldn't penalize someone just because their culture is slightly different. And also, our learning and development systems. Every company spends a lot of money on learning and development, and which includes mentorship programs, education, some of the stuff that allyship and what Paramount has promoted, and we need to continue to make those investments. We need to continue to look at our employee base, and some staff may need some mentorship, maybe from the AAPI community. That's fine. That's how it should be. And of course, other communities as well. And so the companies that I'm involved with, and, I'm an investor in a number of companies and on the board of a number of companies. And these are front and center issues that, that we think about all the time.
Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, my company is, 140 something people. I'm the only non-Chinese person, so I can speak as a minority in this case. But I think, one thing that we always like to think in terms of the geopolitics, that stops at the door, right? Inside the company, you can do everything you can within the company to create, the most conducive environment to collaboration, to growth. And then you have to push outside the door as well to do what you can to educate people beyond. And so I think wherever you are, that's the case. I'm also involved with my alma mater, the London School of Economics, which has a very large Chinese population, particularly in London. And so I'm interested in what Stephanie was saying earlier, and steps that have been taken to reassure the community there. And there's, for every horrible story, there's always behind it, good stories that come out of how people rally together. And I think, showcasing those, because that can be so important in the wake of some incident. And so, educating people in the company to be good citizens beyond the doors of the company as well as within.
I'm wondering, when we talk about support, if there's anything people have done, friends or, colleagues, that have just made you feel better. And for Fritz and Duncan, it would be for your partners. Yeah. I know for me, at the height of the Asian attacks, getting a text from a non-AAPI colleague just saying, are you okay? And it didn't even have to go into, the attacks, and I just knew what they were talking about. And that one text really made a difference. I'm just wondering if anyone has experienced things from friends or family or, people that seem supportive and helpful.
By the way, just to share a personal experience, but I went to this high school called the United World Colleges, and it was actually set up to promote international understanding. So we had kids from 80 different countries in one school and now it's all over the world in terms of the colleges. So after those incidents, many of my schoolmates came together and said it's even more important now for us to spread the gospel of international understanding, why we're all very similar, and that why empathy is extremely important. So I think it's not only work-wise, but I think in the community, in our lives, a lot of people reach out and give us a lot of support throughout that difficult period.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Duncan, go ahead, please. No, please go ahead, Duncan.
I mean, just partly the experience. I experienced the pandemic in the U.S. and also in France and under lockdown in Paris for 4 months. And so, actually with a Chinese husband, I mean, we felt almost the opposite of the problem, and the people were showering us with even famously grumpy neighbors in Paris were suddenly concerned, and it was quite touching actually how kind people were in those situations, and sometimes especially towards somebody from overseas, who looks different, and so I actually in France, I must say we kind of found a slightly different environment too. Early on in the Bay Area, there was a lot of tension, and seeing that from afar was really hurtful, because we know how wonderful a city San Francisco is, but some of that was really damaging, and particularly that resonated, as I said, overseas through media. And we know there's a much better, that is temporary, that is an exception, but it's so important that the community rallies around. And I think in places like France, there's a bit more of a de-emphasizing differences, which is it's the culture of that country, and we can talk about that. There's the U.S. is an immigration nation, so it's a different setup, but we have to manage these issues in different ways. But the same goal clearly is to avoid these horrible incidents and to rally around. So I think, it's been interesting traveling around. I think, Fritz, you've been in Hong Kong for this period, and I guess your kids actually have probably the most interesting experiences.
Yeah, that's right. I think maybe one of the observations that I've noted is this idea of trying to identify inspirational characters, and I know the Asia Society has done an excellent job at this, but also other organizations too, is to in terms of our Game Changer Awards, as well as just our typical speaker series, whether it's in Hong Kong or Paris, is where we're always identifying, I guess you can call it, members of the AAPI community who have shown a high level of excellence. And it isn't just Hollywood. And in Hollywood, I think it's its unfair share of attention. But we're talking about like science fiction writers like S.L. Huang or Yun Ha Lee, who are both amazing Asian Americans who have written fantastic science fiction works, or Jamie Cullum, who is an British Asian who's just a fabulous jazz pianist, or Terence Tao, the Fields Medal in Mathematics, and he's been highlighted, or some of my own personal friends at the Harvard Medical School, who are of South Asian descent, who are just doing phenomenal work, and the fact that these members of the AAPI community are just being celebrated for their excellence and showing their incredible contributions to our society, to themselves, and really to the world is something that's very encouraging to me. And I kind of feel like there's a little bit of cause and effect. When there's a little bit of hatred here, then over on this side, we see, organizations of goodwill, including the Asia Society, highlighting, this excellence. And frankly, like this conference today, we have, one of our keynote speakers, Joy Chen, who is just a fabulous entrepreneur and, former politician and just a leader in the, Chinese American community. And for example, this is just one small example of, what we're seeing. And to me, that's very encouraging.
Definitely. When we think about the issues facing the AAPI community, many transcend to other communities, LGBTQ plus, Jewish, Muslim, et cetera. How, in addition to the things you talked about, Fritz, is Asia Society providing a leadership role and a safe space for people to come together and celebrate one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think a safe space is important. Our former president, Joseph Shiran, liked to talk about let's shed light and not heat. And really what she meant by that is let's collect, the multifarious opinions and perspectives from the region, from everywhere, just put it on the table. And we can have opinions, but let's make sure our opinions are not too strong because it's better just to collect these ideas. And frankly, I think that's the culture of the Asia Society. And, and again, to me, like, I feel pretty good about that. And, do we agree all the time? No, but that's fine. It's important really to hone in on role models. And to me, role models are just so important, especially because I have two young daughters. And I think, Stephanie would also agree, where we're always looking for role models. We're always looking to build them up. Let's shine a light on them. And again, some others are speaking at this conference. They've spoken at the Asia Society before. There are trustees like Steph and others. And to me, that's, to me, that's the positive that, I really want to latch onto, because I think there's going to be some further, positive benefits and, this great feeling because of that.
I can add a bit to, Fritz and I are actually both members of Asia Society Japan as founding members, and I normally spend quite a lot of time in Japan, and I happened to be at the launch event where Caroline Kennedy, a former trustee, was there with LGBT activists from Vietnam, but also from Japan, and involving city leaders as well, provincial leaders in Japan, talking about how they need to make changes. And Japan is a famously conservative society in that. And sometimes it takes, frankly, an outsider, whether they consider Asia Society as American or international, but coming in from outside and having that debate. And with Caroline Kennedy's leadership at the time, that was extremely helpful. And James Kondo, who leads our center there, it was a fascinating event. And Japan's society is changing, but it needs a nudge here and now. And that was great to be part of. So I think we'll. By sharing these experiences across the network, we have this Asia 21 group of young leaders, including LGBT activists as well. That's a very useful way of sharing knowledge across territories.
And I'm a newbie to Asia Society. I've just had the honor of joining the board of trustee. And I have to say, in the last few months since I joined, the experience has been really amazing. First of all, the quality of the people here is just outstanding. Many people are leaders in their fields, very celebrated leaders, of countries, including. And to hear the debates that go on, and as Fritz said, they shed light, but there's no heat, and it's open debate, and it's a lot of celebration of diversity of views and also of individuals. So for me, it's been eye-opening, and I think there's a lot that Asia Society can do to further the cause of inclusivity.
I want to move on to talk about mental health. Statistics tell us that the rates of suicide or contemplating suicide among AAPI youth and AAPI LGBTQ plus youth especially is rising, and it's really at a crisis level. So what can companies, organizations, the public do to better protect mental health?
Maybe I'll start. I think what I'm seeing is increasingly the stigma of mental health is getting removed. People are encouraged to speak up, to reach out, and also there's a lot of help that is actually available. For example, for us, like we do have Wellness Society where people can ask for support, and the firm is very supportive. So I think that removal of the stigma, the openness, and the availability of resources for people will be increasingly important and embraced. And I think all of us, whether for study or for work, we all know that it's a long game, and that stamina and sustainability is everything if we want to make sure that we have the most impact, in society and in our lives.
Yeah, Cindy, I think one of the things we've seen is, suicide rates, which, referring to that article that we had talked about before, for the overall population across all ages and genders, for AAPI groups, as well as the overall populations, is actually the same. But what we've seen, unfortunately, is for the younger people between 15 and 24, we've seen that spike. Now, that spike is not any different from what we've seen from Native American or Alaskan Americans, or Caucasians. It's just slightly higher. And so this is a young person problem, first and foremost. I think what's surprising is that the AAPI community is just shot up so quickly. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about that, and we think about the AAPI community, it's so diverse, it's so heterogeneous with different lifestyle, diets, culture, and all that sort of stuff, that it behooves us to do more research. And what we've seen, and this is according to the National Institutes of Health, is that research done about the AAPI community, it's actually underfunded. And so we don't understand, scientists don't understand, some of the drivers behind mental health issues. And this is just one example. For example, a South Asian American is twice as likely to have heart disease than cancer. But a Korean American is twice as likely to have cancer than heart disease. And these are two subpopulations within the larger AAPI community. And frankly, we're going to need researchers to pitch the Health and Human Services Department, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health for funding so we can do specific research and so we can understand. It's almost like we have to disaggregate this large heterogeneous community so that we can find insights and maybe we can save some people. And it's just super, super important. And so to me, the big takeaway from that article, and hopefully maybe we can share it with the audience later, is, we have to take a very scientific process. We have to really take into account a number of factors. And because we're not, I guess technically we're all one people on one level, but because of diet and diversity and culture and lifestyle and a range of other factors, we're also very, very different. And but we do live in one society, and so we owe it to each other to kind of do that research to try to find those insights. And with those insights, maybe our mental health professionals and our physicians can possibly draw some conclusions, and maybe we can get those numbers down a little bit. And it is true that the number one cause of death for members of the AAPI community between 15 and 24 is suicide. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that's a serious issue. And frankly, how do we address it? And I think it's going to come down to science. It's going to come down to funding. And of course, and all of us are voters and taxpayers, and we have to push our lawmakers and policymakers to think very carefully and make this a higher priority.
Duncan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the role, talking to a media professional, I think, we're all aware of the power of the media, and we love our media, but also we are aware increasingly of the power of social media. Obviously, it's in the news a lot right now with the probable, change in ownership of Twitter. But when you think about, when young people, and I think that's right to focus on that segment in the APAC community and others, have been confined at home, have lost the natural release that comes from randomly running into somebody at school or having extracurricular activities. And so the power of social media has been magnified by lockdowns and separations. And therefore, issues not just suicide, but self-harm, diet-related issues based on perceptions of beauty and so on. We know there's an issue here. And so, a lot of companies are taking steps, in this. And we need to double down on this because, we're becoming more reliant even after the pandemic, even if we can say after, not yet, on social media, on technology. So it's even more important to look for signs also, to alert, if you see something odd, even in, frankly, preventing terrorism, as we know, posts of that nature, but also the more subtle things that sort of derive through algorithms, some from companies like TikTok and others have a responsibility here. So I think the power of social media, and interestingly, of course, the API community in the US is very divided by, particularly the more recent immigrants, by what they consume. So you may have recent arrivals from China who are going to be on WeChat. You have others online. You have so it's important to understand the diversity of social media, reflecting those individual communities as well as the big platforms that we all know. And so this is important work to understand the power of social media. It's it's a great thing, but in the wrong hands and in anybody's hands done badly, naturally can have problematic consequences.
Definitely. Well, Fritz, Duncan, and Steph, I think we're going to wrap it up now. I want to thank you so much for taking time to be here. I think we talked about a lot of important things and steps that our companies can make and steps that we can do to help in this difficult time. So thank you. And to everyone watching, thank you for watching. And we're going to take a 5-minute break and then come back with the next panel.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks, Cindy.